every single different anime genre explained, starting off with probably the most well-known genre, which is Shonen. Now, Shonen literally translates to young boy or youth, and therefore it is technically more of a demographic rather than a traditional genre per se. The supposed age range for Shonen anime is supposed to be 12 to 18, but of course this is not necessarily the case. Like, I'm 23, I love One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach, for example, which are all like the big three of Shonen animes. An anime is defined as a shonen if the manga is published in a shonen magazine, regardless of what the manga is about. For example, like if you watched AOT or Death Note, those are both classified as shonens because they're published in a shonen magazine, but if you watch them, you would know that they're definitely not for boys that are 12 years old. So a better definition usually used is like battle shonen, where it's an anime primarily focused around fighting. Some modern examples is JJK, Demon Slayer, and you have My Hero Academia. Now, a much more traditional genre would be fantasy. Well, kind of, because in fantasy you have, of course, stuff like Lord of the Rings, which in anime like the equivalent would be like Freerun. Now, both of these are high fantasy, which is basically a type of fantasy where it's set in a completely fictional world. They're usually, like high stakes, like saving a kingdom or like a big war. You have things like prophecies, you have loads of magic, stuff like elves and orcs and all of that kind of business. However, there is other types of fantasy. So you have stuff like historical fantasy, for example Demon Slayer, which has fantasy elements but it's also mixed into like a historical time period. And then you have dark fantasy, for example Berserk, which is a fantasy mixed in with much darker elements, such as having like horror or like extreme violence. And you have shonen fantasy, which is a shonen combined with fantasy elements. A good example of this would be Black Clover. An important note to mention is that an anime can belong to multiple genres. That's going to be kind of a common theme throughout this video. Now, next up we have comedy anime, which you might have guessed from the name. It's basically just supposed to make you laugh. Now look, I'm gonna be honest, I've never watched a comedy anime, I don't think. But from my research, they seem to have kind of a bad rep for not actually being that funny. If you're looking for recommendations now, Gintama is a popular one, which you could classify as a comedy anime. But like some other ones that people mention on Reddit that are good apparently is Kaguya-sama's Love is War and then Chio's School Road. However, if you want my opinion, right, while this definitely doesn't classify as a comedy anime, I'm gonna cheat it, right? Hajime no Ippo is the funniest anime I've ever watched. I've been telling all my friends to go watch it for a while. Trust me, it's hilarious and it's got a great story. If you want to laugh, that's the one I would watch. Now, moving on, we have Shojo, which is the opposite of shonen because again, it's a demographic, but this time it's being for girls, so around that kind of 12 to 16 age range. One of the most important shoujo animes was Rose of Versailles, which was released in 1979, which I know from my video when I kind of broke down why is anime obsessed with Europe, because this anime was set in Europe, so makes sense, right? And it explored like topics of, a woman being raised as a man and then having a relationship with another woman, so it was pretty kind of on the nose for the time period. The other important shoujo anime is Sailor Moon, which led to the subgenre of magical girls, which kind of like, as the name suggests, is when like the main character, usually a girl, has some kind of magical or superpowers. Now, Sailor Moon is super popular, right? It helped bring anime to the West and it kind of had like the same impact as Dragon Ball did for shonen, for example. But a genre that I can say that I actually watch is sci-fi. Similar to fantasy, of course, sci-fi is a massive genre in the West. For example, like, some of the biggest examples being both Star Wars and Star Trek. It's a genre which, is set in the future. They have very futuristic technology and usually incorporate stuff like space travel. The first big sci-fi anime in Japan was Astro Boy, and with it being such a big success, there was loads of other sci-fi animes made after that. So like some of the other big ones is Akira, Ghost in the Shell, and Cowboy Bebop. Now, moving on is a fairly self-explanatory one. It is romance, right? Which is about a romance story. Now, truthfully, again, these are not personally my thing. The only one I've ever watched was called Your Name, And this was like, I don't know, probably like 10 years ago. My friend went through a breakup and he was like, oh, Sam, you gotta watch this, da-da-da. So I was like, fuck it. It's not bad, but to be fair, I couldn't remember the name of it. So, I mean, I guess that also says a lot about it. However, from my research and trying to understand what's the difference between a Western romance and then like a anime romance, is that in an anime romance, right, typically somebody falls in love pretty quickly. They also like to exaggerate, you know, that whole butterflies in the stomach feeling. And I think this is typically because the anime romances are more suited to teenagers, whereas like a Western romance kind of hits like a broader age range. Now, again, if you want my take, right, I know this is not a romance anime, but Dan, in my opinion, like, it's got some romantic elements going on, and I think the anime is sick. But it's also got a load of fighting and supernatural elements, so take it, watch it if you want to. I'd recommend it. Now, the next genre is an interesting one. I'll be honest, I didn't really know this was a thing until researching this video, and that is slice of life. So, if you don't know what that is, basically it's to capture somebody's regular day-to-day life, typically in high school. Now, if this sounds boring, well, that is kind of the common criticism for this genre. But like, look, each their own, and credit where credit is due, because the longest running anime of all time is a slice of life anime called Sazen-san, which has been running since 1969 and has over 2,800 episodes. And like another big one that definitely deserves a mention is also Doraemon, which is about a robotic cat from the future which helps a young boy with futuristic gadgets, usually causing funny problems along the way. So these two shows are massive and have been running for a very, very long time, so there's clearly a big audience for it. But okay, next up is my personal favorite. It's either this one or Shonen, and it is Seinen. Now, similar to Shonen, this is also a demographic, with Seinen translating to young man or youth. And typically what makes a quote-unquote Seinen is if it was released in a Seinen magazine. For example, Berserk is, in my opinion, the GOAT of Seinen, and it was published in a magazine called Young Animal, which is a Seinen magazine. Now, compared to Shonen, these are for older people, you know, like kind of like 18 plus. So therefore they have more mature themes, darker stories, more complex characters, and, you know, just kind of like less simple hero beats the villain storytelling. Of course, you've got Berserk, but I gotta mention the big three of Seinen, you know, Vinland Saga and Vagabond, and like it created goated images like these. I am working on a video talking about the big three of Seinen, so please subscribe if you don't want to miss out on it. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have Josei, which means woman. So it's similar to Seinen, but instead it's for adult women. Compared to Shojo, Josei usually has more realistic relationships, adult problems, you know, more emotional complexity, and it kind of also includes stuff like sex, marriage, heartbreak, da-da-da-da-da. Now, Josei is a lot smaller than Shojo, and I can't again say I've watched any of these, but from my research, the most popular ones that were recommended was Paradise Kiss and Chihafaru. I hope I didn't butcher that. I apologize if I did. Now, the final age demographic is Kodomomuke. Again, I hope I said that correctly, and it's a genre for kids under 12. It's best known for Pokemon, which in all honesty I did not realize that this was classified as an anime until I researched this video, so there you go. Another example, which again is also super popular, at least in the West, is Beyblade. So yeah, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, right? It's simple, colorful shows that kids will enjoy watching. It's not super violent, and yeah, I mean, I think we all know what it is if you watch Pokemon as a kid. Now, this is an interesting one with Isekai translating to other world, and it's basically a subgenre of fantasy. Basically, what is defined as a Isekai is when somebody from our normal world is transferred into a different world. Some of the best examples of this is That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime and Mushoku Tensei. However, the most popular one is Sword Art Online, which popularized the genre. However, that itself is actually debated if it's an Isekai, because basically the characters are trapped in a VR world while their physical bodies are in the real world, but if you die in the VR world, you die in the real world. So I don't know, people debate, you guys debate the technicalities in the comments. Okay, moving on, we have another one of my personal favorites, sports animes. Now, surprise surprise, is a genre about people playing a sport. Typically it's in a high school or college team. Some great examples that I love is Slam Dunk or Haikyuu, but you got some different ones in there. For example, you got Blue Lock, which is very cool because that's the whole concept of the ego, and I also personally love football. couple. It's just a shame that the animation is dog shit for the most time. Emphasis on the most time because shout out to the last episode, that shit was peak. Also, again, I'm gonna go back to Hajime no Ippo. Like I said, I've been trying to get my friends to watch it. It's hilarious. I highly recommend it. Now, something extremely different is the Ecchi genre, which translates to naughty, pervert, or sexually suggestive. So as you might imagine, this is my favorite anime genre, and I'm gonna put a Google Docs down below with loads of recommendations. Okay, no, in reality, my understanding of Ecchi is basically an anime that is sexually suggestive for comedy or fan service. So it's not the same as hentai because it usually still has like a normal story and avoids like explicit sex. Also, my understanding is that Ecchi animes are usually linked with other genres. It's not like a standalone genre by itself. And apparently the most popular one is High School DxD. So I'm guessing if you want to get bricked, then watch that. Also, on a similar note, to my understanding, is the Harem genre. If I butchered that, I apologize. I did watch a video. There seem to be different ways of saying it. Now, High School DxD is also apparently a part of this genre, and it's basically a genre where one man has a bunch of girls interested in it. So he's basically a Chad, right? However, you also get the reverse harem, where a female has a bunch of men interested in her. Again, I can't say I'm an expert when it comes to this, but to be fair, it finally makes sense where Naruto's harem jutsu comes from. My understanding is that the plotline is usually pretty basic, and it's mainly made for like horny teenagers who want to imagine themselves in that situation. But look, no judgment, right? Okay, I'm the one bloody making a video on covering all of these genres, so I can't say shit. Quickly moving on, we have a interesting one, and that is the music genre. This is because in the West, right, there's loads of famous animated movies that have singing in them. You know, think of Lion King, Aladdin, Frozen, the list goes on and on and on. However, in anime, this is not really a thing, and instead, you know, music animes typically have characters that actually make music in the show instead of just singing for like random unrelated reasons. Some examples include K-On!, which is based around a music club, and another example is Bocchi the Rock, which is where she joins like a band as a guitarist. But I did find quite interesting why there is no like Disney replicas like with the singing. I don't know if anybody can tell me, then leave a comment down below. Something very different but super popular is mecha anime. This is a anime genre which is around a giant robot or advanced machines, usually in battles. Typically there's a lot of like war and conflict as well. The robots are often cool, but the real story typically is, you know, about war or politics or like the burden of being a pilot of one of these robots. There is some big hitters in this genre. For example, you got Mobile Suit Gundam, Neon Genesis Evangelion, and Code Geass. It is important to note that they also cooked with the merchandise from these shows, with the robots becoming super popular toys. Now, next up is a genre with big hitters, and that is the thriller genre. This is similar to like Western thriller movies in that it's an anime which is built around suspense, danger, mystery, and like psychological pressure. Some of the best examples are Monster, Parasite, and Psycho Pass. Again, really good high rated animes in this genre. If you made it this far, then you will definitely enjoy my other video on the 17 different anime studios which you can watch here, and thank you very much for watching.